Hello, everyone. Greetings from São Paulo. Welcome to another exclusive webinar for members of the Cambridge Biosite program. Let's just wait a few seconds until people are connecting. I hope you are all good. Happy Halloween. Today's Halloween, right? Okay, let's see. Some participants arriving. Hello, everyone. Hello from Rio. That's great. I'm based in São Paulo. Hello, happy Halloween to you too. Hello, Guarulhos. Wonderful. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. It's good to have all you guys here. My name is Sergio Varela. I'm responsible for the Cambridge Biosite program here at Cambridge University Press and Assessment. If you have any questions about the program, you can use the email address that appears on the right, cbis.br@cambridge.org. Okay. Okay. All right. So thanks a lot for joining us today. Today is a very special day. We are very excited about it because we are celebrating the second year anniversary of this program. So yay. Thanks a lot for being part of this very nice program. Our mission with this program, I always say that, is to offer our teachers, our members, structured support in terms of teacher development. And we have a special webinar today with Professor Colin, which I'm sure will be extremely helpful for your teaching practice. Okay, but before I introduce our guest speaker today, let me talk to you about two quick things. The first thing is that we are going to have a raffle at the end of this webinar. So we are raffling some Cambridge goodies, including some teacher development books and 2 online teacher development courses. These are Cambridge courses, okay? So if you could stay until the very end, you have the chance to win one of these 3 prizes, okay? Okay. We hope you will like this. The second thing I want to talk to you about is the campaign we are launching today. We are launching this campaign called Sua Jornada para o IATEFL 2026, or Your Journey to IATEFL 2026. IATEFL next year is going to be in Brighton, a beautiful city in the UK. It's going to happen from April 21st to April 24th, 2026. So next year. And let me ask you, would you like to attend IATEFL 2026? I would. Let me just show you a very quick video about it. Oh, just a second. I need to share the sound. Okay. Can you hear it? Oh, well. No? Oh, okay. Let me try again. Sorry about that. Leonardo, I need your help, please. You need to let me share the sound because it's not on. Could you please check that? Just a moment, guys. Technology issues. Please bear with me. Yeah, sometimes this happens. We make a trial before the webinar. We test everything, and we can share the sound and the video. But then, when we really need it, we can't share it. I'm sorry about that, guys. Okay, so if I can't show you the video, I'll talk about it. No problem. Just a second. Yeah. No sound. Sorry, Leonardo, no sound. Okay. Well, let me talk about this very nice campaign that we are organizing for you. I'll send you the link to this very nice video I was going to show you later on. Okay. So, as I said, IATF is going to happen next year in April. And we are going to take one member of the Cambridge Biosite program to attend the IATEFL 2026 in Brighton next year. The prize includes flight tickets to the UK, hotel with breakfast, transfers in the UK. So when you arrive at the airport and when you leave the hotel to return, you have a car waiting for you. And of course, we will register you in the event, so you don't need to worry about. Cool, isn't it? Lunch and dinner are not included, but it's still a very nice prize. I hope you get interested. I hope you participate. And let me talk about how you can participate in this campaign. Well, first of all, you will need to scan this QR code on the right. You have to fill out a form, and there will be on this page with the form there will be all the informations, all the information, all the details you need about the campaign. Okay, you need to have a virtual bookshop, Gisal Digital. I'm going to talk about it in a few seconds. And you must make at least one sale of Cambridge material to your students during the period of the campaign. So the campaign starts today, October the 31st, and goes until February the 28th next year. So each sale earns you a coupon. So more sales, more coupons, more chances to win. And of course, you need a valid passport. Okay. I hope you like it. I hope you participate, and good luck to you all. About Isal Digital, some people, in case you don't know, because many people do already, members of the program can have a virtual bookshop to sell Cambridge material directly to their students. So this gives teachers a more professional look. It prevents the students from buying wrong material, and one of the most important things, in my opinion, is that teachers can get a commission over the sales, which is up to 25% over print material and up to 18% over digital material. I say up to because teachers determine the price of the material for their students. So you can give 25% and get no commission at all. So the material is going to be very, very accessible to your students. Or you can give a 20% discount and get five to yourself, or you can give 15%, 10%, 5%. Anyway, you choose how much your student will pay and how much you will earn. Okay. So in case you don't have a virtual bookshop yet, you can scan this QR code on the right and you can have one. Okay. I'll give you a second if you want. Um, and that's it, really. I wish you all good luck. All the information you need is on the Cambridge Biosite website. This is a screenshot of the Cambridge Biosite website. Okay, all the information you need, the links, and how to get your Digital Virtual Bookshop. All the information you need is there on the website. Okay. Okay, finally, the special webinar we have today is called When Less Can Be More, Taking a Strategic Approach to Online Teaching. And our guest speaker is Colin Ward. A Fulbright scholar, Colin Ward received his master's degree in TESOL from the University of London, and he is a professor of ESOL at Lone Star College in Houston, Texas, in the United States. He has been teaching ESOL and writing ELT materials for over 20 years now, and has been a featured speaker at numerous local, state, and international conferences. Colin has a keen interest in bridging theory to practice and applying content and genre-based approaches to language learning. This is so interesting. In his spare time, Colin enjoys cycling, traveling, and volunteering as a figure skating judge. How nice is that? So you'll be able to interact with Colin using the chat box, but please leave the Q&A, the question and answer box, for questions to Colin to be answered at the end of the webinar. Okay? If you want, you can have a certificate for this webinar. We will share a link to a feedback form, which is very, very important for us at the end. So you fill out the form and you'll be able to download your certificate for the webinar today. All right? Okay. Professor Colin Ward, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Okay, thank you for that introduction, Sergio, and thank you for bringing me back for this event. I had a great time last time, and I just really love how big of a support Cambridge is for our teachers and professional development. And I'm thrilled to hear that your program has grown exponentially in Brazil, and obviously also a huge commitment, not just by Cambridge, but by all the teachers out there wishing to better their teaching. And I want to say thank you for spending a Friday afternoon with me. I guess it's about 4 o'clock there. It's Halloween here, so we are getting ready for the children to knock on our doors and ask for candy. And I am here to talk about online teaching. So Sergio, when he came to me with this idea about a webinar about online teaching, I flashbacked to COVID, and that was a moment in time, unprecedented, as you all know. And it happened for us right before spring break, and we said goodbye to our students. We said, we'll see you in a week. Well, we didn't see them in a week. We had to see them only online. It was a tough time because not only were our students not really well versed in online learning, the teachers were not very well versed in online teaching. And what we learned, the big lesson we really did learn from that, is that less can be more when it comes to creating an online class, and it means taking a strategic approach to your teaching, not thinking of the online classroom as just replicating what you might be doing in a face-to-face classroom. I think if you've been around in the teaching profession, you know this. You know, it's a different environment with different advantages and different disadvantages. And so I'm going to be talking about several topics today, and I'm going to be starting with looking at some generational shifts in the digital world, and looking especially at Gen Z, which my kids are Gen Z, so often on my mind, and how they interact with technology and what that can mean for teaching and learning. Next, I'm going to shift from a more social perspective to a more psychological perspective and explore cognitive load theory, which gets into how the brain processes information and how this can impact how students and how teachers can deal with information and information overload. This will then pivot to looking into this concept of microlearning and how the use of micro lessons can both speak to the demands of an online environment, but also to a digital generation of learners. And also how we can balance these microlearning concepts and modules with deeper dives into content and why it's important to have that balance. And then at the end, I'm going to be looking at some practical ways to simplify instructional design, from grading to tool selection to making learning more accessible and more manageable. And then finally, at the very end, we will have some time to reflect and perhaps time for people to ask questions. I do have the chat open, so if something comes to mind, feel free to use the chat and put your ideas or your comments or your questions in there. But I definitely will take stuff at the end as well. So I'm going to start with this goldfish. So back in 2015, Microsoft conducted this study, and it was a marketing study, and it gained a lot of traction and attention. And it was really designed to support Microsoft's advertising products and their platforms by showing this need for engaging but concise content. And according to Microsoft, they found that the average span of Gen Z individuals was about the same as a goldfish. And they said it was about 8 seconds, which actually is just 1 second shy of a goldfish. According to them, they said a goldfish has an attention span of 9 seconds. So they attributed this decrease to the generation's, kind of constant exposure to digital content and multiple screens. Now, we've known since this study was published that this is not in fact true. In fact, I looked it up, and goldfish can actually remember information for weeks and up to a whole month. And there's a whole bunch of other factors that can affect how closely we pay attention to something, the environment we're in, the motivation we have to learn something, the design of the task. It's actually quite hard to pin down and find any research that proves that Gen Z individuals have they're less attentive from a cognitive standpoint. And so I thought that was interesting, and I think it's interesting always to kind of question our assumptions. This is something I teach my students all the time. And so this made me kind of go down this rabbit hole of thinking, well, what is really going on, and why do we have this assumption that there is these lower attention spans, perhaps, of newer generations? I found in my research that it's really less about their inability to pay attention and more about digital fatigue, which can be due to this overabundance of information that is, constantly coming at them through their screens. So it's really more about how the environment is affecting their behavior rather than something that is like biological or cognitive. So this chart breaks down responses. It was a poll asking people of different generations if they agree that they wish to disconnect from their devices more easily. And you can see that Gen Z and millennials did say, well, 80% of them said that they did express this desire to disconnect. It doesn't mean that they do, but the desire is there. And more so of a desire than those from Gen X or baby boomers, which suggests a bit of a generational divide in how our digital devices are experienced and their impact on our lives, depending on where our lives measure up in the transition to digital to full digital nowadays. So Gen Z and millennials are more likely suggesting that they're more likely to feel overwhelmed or tethered to their devices because of the high exposure to social media, to this constant connectivity, and to these it's caused some work-life blurriness, this blur between work and life because of technology. But I also think it's really important to note that studies also suggest that they are well aware of this as well. So exactly how much time is Gen Z spending on screens? So there's some research out there, a recent poll from the Harris poll, which was done earlier this year. It found that Gen Z averaged about 9 hours of screen time per day. And this included times spent on phones, computers, tablets, other digital devices for both work and for leisure. Significantly higher than the global average, which was around 6 hours, 40 minutes. It also found that 90% of us, including a large proportion of Gen Z, check our phones within the first 10 minutes of waking up. I'm also guilty of that. And this suggests that Gen Z is not just tech savvy, but they're tech saturated. And so their routines and their communication and even their sense of identity can be intertwined with the digital platforms that they're accessing. So I wanted to look into the psychology behind this. So there's both this internal and external push and pull with dealing with these devices on such a constant basis. So 83% of Gen Z according to this poll, felt that they did have an unhealthy relationship with their phones, that they were aware of it. And I thought quite interesting, 83% have said that they tried to limit their social media use at some point. 44% had actually deleted a social media app. My kids have talked about this, how they're like, I'm off TikTok. I'm not doing TikTok anymore. It's not good for me. It's too much of a distraction, and then maybe they'll install it a month later. And I have to say my one kid has completely gone off TikTok. But there is this desire to break away and delete it. There's also evidence showing that they have decided to intentionally unfollow and mute accounts, about half of them reporting that. So this really reflects, I think, a tension that we can see between the dependence that we all have on our devices, but also a desire for balance. So I'm going to pivot for a second to this concept then of information overload caused by the access to kind of too much information. It goes by a lot of different names. I found some of these quite humorous, like infoxication and infobesity and infoglut. So like when you woke up this morning, how many emails did you have waiting for you? I have friends who don't even look at emails, but don't delete them either, and they'll have like 11,403 emails waiting for them, and that's the first thing they see in the morning. Or have you ever decided to just say, hey, I'm going to turn off my phone for a while. I don't want those 50 emails or those 20 texts. And if you do that, how many texts are waiting for you at the other side of that? How many likes are on your social media feed? So I'd like to juxtapose this with the image on the right, which is of a very large public library in Brazil. And so when I was in college, I used to love to go to, I went to the library all the time. So I lived in Boston, Massachusetts, and they had this beautiful library, the Boston Public Library, huge reading rooms, millions of books, I think over 100 million items, so many thousands of journals. So even before the internet, I would argue that, we face this challenge of navigating these massive volumes of information. But I think the difference is in the amount of control that is involved and the intention that is behind the behavior. So when I went to go visit the Boston Public Library to do research, or even just to study, or to read, or to go through the 5,000 journals, I went there intentionally with a plan. If it was for college, I had a topic or a thesis that I was researching, and I still felt this like enormous amount of information overload coming to me from all different directions. And I wouldn't say that the overload I feel today is necessarily less because of technology, but I would say that the information that I do receive today has not necessarily been accessed intentionally. It just kind of shows up unwillingly all throughout the day. And I do think that has a psychological effect. So for one, there are more interruptions and more pings, these constant pings from texts and from likes and from snaps. And studies have suggested, like in a 9-to-5 workday, employees are interrupted by these pings from like email or meetings or digital alerts of some sort as often as every 2 to 4 minutes. And so in 8 hours, that's anywhere from like 100 to 200 interruptions per day. And the point is, whether we're studying or whether we're working or relaxing, these pings can pull us out of the moment and then into reactive behavior. And that's something that I want to keep in mind when I am lesson planning. Other research suggests that a little less than half of our interruptions at the workplace are actually self-inflicted. Obsessively checking emails, obsessively checking texts or social media. I myself have struggled with this. And this constant barrage of information can also lead to high recovery times. So there was some research done out of the University of California, led by Dr. Gloria Mark. And the research showed that after a digital distraction, getting a notification of some sort, that it can take an average of 23 minutes and 15 seconds to fully regain focus on the original task at hand. And even a short interruption can triple the rate of errors upon returning to a task. Even if the interruption was only 5 minutes long, you could still lose up to 28 minutes of productivity. Kind of shocking when you look at it in numbers like that. So it's not just about information overload, but it's also about distraction overload. These interruptions that we get are not just, inconvenient or sometimes annoying, but they can actually fragment our attention, and they can reduce our ability to engage deeply with a task and focus on a particular task. It does sound kind of scary, doesn't it? Very Halloween-y. I'm going to get more positive here in a bit. So this is all really true regardless of what kind of information is available to us. So our brains have not evolved that quickly in response to these new digital conditions. And this is where I'm going to turn our attention to cognitive load theory, which is basically a theory about how the brain learns. If you studied, if you took an MAT cell program or an education program, I'm sure you brushed through this subject at some point. But unfortunately, the fact is that as humans, we do have a limited memory capacity. As I get older, it gets a little worse. But our working memory can only handle a limited amount of information at one time. And research shows that learners can typically manage somewhere between like 5 and 9 chunks, what they call chunks of information at once. And so a chunk could be a word, it could be a concept, it could be a step in the process. And this explains why overloading learners with too much content can hinder understanding. So as such, the theory suggests that reducing information can improve learning. And when we simplify and break down content, it can become easier to process. So for example, if we start with something familiar, it will be easier for our students to process if it's a familiar topic or familiar grammar point. The brain will be less likely to discard it automatically. And then finally, the theory of cognitive load theory also suggests that by removing distractors, we can enhance our focus. Why? Because these distractors, whether they're visual, whether they're auditory, something that we hear, whether they're cognitive, they are all competing for our attention. And removing those distractors can help our learners concentrate and retain information more effectively. So here's a visual representation of kind of how our memory works according to this theory. So learning begins with some sort of sensory input, sights, sounds, other stimuli. It could be the beginning of a task at school. This information will enter your sensory memory, which holds it briefly. And even at that point, information will be forgotten or discarded because it's too much. Working memory then continues to either discard info or categorize it into the long-term memory. And it has this limited capacity, right? We're limited to those 5 to 9 chunks of information. So to retain knowledge, what is brought into the cognitive memory has to be encoded into long-term memory. And the long-term memory then stores that into what are called schemas. So in the field of ESL and EFL, if you took an MAT cell program, they talked a lot about activating schematic knowledge, right? That's the schemas that are sitting in your long-term memory that you're trying to get at, that you're trying to unleash when you are starting a lesson, for example. So once those are stored in long-term memory, they can be retrieved back into working memory when they're needed for problem solving, for decision making, or for learning new material. So it's not just a one way, it's not just one direction. So the more we use schemas, um, the more developed they become and the easier they are to recall. And that's true regardless of the information that is available. So at each stage, information can be forgotten and it can be lost if it's not rehearsed, if it's not encoded, or if it's not retrieved efficiently. And that suggests that the more distractions we have in an online environment, then the less likely the incoming information is going to stick. So now I'm going to look at this more from the perspective of us, of teachers and of students. So cognitive load theory distinguishes between three different types of load. So intrinsic load, extraneous load, and germane load. So intrinsic load is the inherent difficulty of the material itself. So for example, learning calculus would be more complex than learning basic arithmetic. Learning restrictive relative clauses would be a lot harder than learning the present tense. And then there's the extraneous load. So the extraneous load refers to this like unnecessary mental effort, unnecessary because it can be caused by poor instructional design. So there might be a lot of confusing diagrams on the screen. There might be cluttered slides. There might be too much split attention. So in online teaching, minimizing intrinsic load and extraneous load is crucial to help students process and retain information more effectively. And then conversely, as teachers, we want to promote germane load. So germane load is the mental effort that we devote to constructing schemas. It's the good kind of load. So cognitive theory helps us to avoid, if we follow it, it can help us to avoid overburdening or overloading our learners with more than they can like effectively process cognitively into schemas for long-term memory storage and future recall. And so we want to then scaffold and create lessons, I think, that take advantage of the schemas that they already have. And how does that translate into lesson planning? So the first step is to reduce intrinsic load. So this goes back to Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, finding that sweet spot, that gap between what students can do by themselves and what they can do with your guidance as a teacher and where that is. And it's going to be different for each student. This means then to reduce intrinsic load, making sure that you're taking inventory of what your students are able to do, what they can handle. It means breaking content down into smaller steps. It means when you are designing your material or your lesson that you are making sure to sequence tasks from more simple to more complex. And it also means scaffolding by providing a lot of models. Of course, course books do this already. When I write course books, this is how we think of the activities on a page. We want to start simple. We want to start with, like a leading question, some basic vocabulary. We want them to then play a little bit more with the language, and then we want to go to freer practice at the end. So you're going always from this, more controlled to freer practice. And we want to be really cognizant of that also on an online environment, of course, because not only are we dealing with the language learning, but we're also dealing with the cognitive load from the digital environment. We also want to reduce extraneous load. So again, that is kind of the task itself and how it's designed. So we don't want that unnecessary mental effort from bad design. We can minimize it through using clear design, through using very consistent visuals and concise explanations, like less is more. We can do it by avoiding splitting students' attention. So I think about my students, and when I teach a reading, or when I have my students go over a reading, there's so many different ways I can cover a reading. or listening. I could have them read or listen just for the main idea. I can have them read or listen for detail. I can have them read or listen for a particular piece of language, right? We cannot expect them to do all three of those things at the same time. There's research to suggest that if students are reading aloud, there's no way they're also going to be really processing the meaning of the words because they're too concerned about pronouncing the words. The brain is limited in this way. And so I'm a fan of students reading aloud, but I'm also a fan of reading for comprehension, and I see those as two different tasks. And so this is about reducing that extraneous load, because you're trying to simplify the presentation of not just the information, but what students are doing with it. It means that you're using the visuals and text in your class very strategically, and it means that you are trying your best not to split their attention among or between tasks. And then we want to do the opposite, and we want to promote germane load. So that's part of the scaffolding. So we want to start with, I always start my classes with personal examples or some kind of prior knowledge to activate their schema. And I try to connect new material with old material as much as I can. You know, so if we're planning with these existing schemas in mind and with these strategies in mind, then we are able to reduce that kind of unnecessary cognitive strain and then enhance more meaningful learning. So at the end of the day, it's not just about what we're teaching, but it's how we are structuring the experience. And this now kind of gets into how does cognitive load theory translate into an actual lesson plan, and what might this look like in the actual classroom, in the way that you present materials on the day of class. So there is this push in the education field for what is called microlearning. I don't know if any of you have heard this or have used it in your classroom. If you have, share it in the chat. I'd be curious to hear what you say. But microlearning is basically what it sounds like. So it means delivering information in kind of these smaller digestible chunks that are centered around a single concept or skill. So instead of, for example, like, you know, a long lecture or really dense reading, micro-learning would deliver that content in shorter bursts. So I kind of liken micro-learning, it's kind of like the espresso shot, not like the slow brewed pot of coffee, so to speak. And there's been some research to suggest that if we use micro-learning as part of our pedagogy, students are more likely to retain the information that we give them. And it's also more likely to be retrieved and then encoded into long-term memory. So this is not just informed by cognitive load theory. It's also informed by what is called the social media effect. So younger generations, we know, are used to consuming content quickly through platforms like TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. And basically, microlearning is kind of tapping into this behavior by mimicking the format and the pace of social media and mimicking that in the way you present material to your students, whether in person or, in our case, in an online environment. And so you can think of microlearning kind of as like putting together the pieces of a puzzle. And Gen Alpha apparently does this very well. They have kind of this natural ability, or a learned ability, I would say, probably, sorry, to put these different puzzle pieces together and make sense of it. These little bits of content from here, from YouTube, from from TikTok, from an article, and they're able to make meaning out of shorter pieces of information into a whole. So it might be, like in our context, perhaps it is a short language point or a pronunciation tip or a grammar tip. You see these kinds of things in textbooks. This is what microlearning is about. So it's kind of the antithesis of the old kind of enormous grammar book that was, 300 pages long, and it was chart after chart after chart. So instead, it's going with a more microlearning kind of pedagogy. They're designed to be quick, and they're designed to be clear, and they're designed to be immediately useful to the task at hand. And that is what we call a grammar at the point of need, right? So if students don't need to be, if they're just writing in the first person about themselves, well, I'll focus on first person simple present. I don't need to go into all of the details of third person at that point if they're not going to be using it in their writing or in their speaking, right? So it's about adjusting the language that we do want to focus on and give these mini lessons on grammar for the particular task at hand. So it helps to make these small points about grammar and pronunciation or language more contextualized and less something that is just kind of in a box and in a decontextualized box. And I also think it can help build confidence and more accuracy in learners because in their everyday communication, because we're correcting errors at the moment they arise, and we're not going to go on about it for 30 minutes. We're going to give them a quick micro lesson, go over the error, move on. If it comes up again, we bring it up again. So it's more nimble. It's like nimble grammar. Is kind of the way I look at it. And it's not, I haven't taught a grammar class in a traditional kind of like, we're going to go through all the tenses first, and then we're going to do modals, and then we're going to do passive. I haven't done that in a long time, simply because I much prefer to teach it at the point of need in using content as the driver of my course. In the context of a reading course, I can bring grammar into any course I want, whether it's reading or writing or speaking. And I really feel like if I do these kind of more micro lessons at the point of need, I see more results in the students because we're dealing with the here and now. So in terms of structural design, it's all about being strategic and being thoughtful about your structural design. So choosing outputs for Gen Z and Alpha, for example, like short form videos. It also means breaking up the grading process more. So one thing that I've changed in my, probably I would say maybe in the last 10 years, is I do way more completion grades than I do evaluative grading. And I want to focus on the process, and I want to reward the work that they're putting in throughout the process. If perhaps a longer project, I like to break it down and give a completion grade for each section, rather than waiting for, some huge grade at the end that's holistic. I've also really reduced the number of points that I'm grading at a time, so I'm not going to point out if there's a lot of different grammar mistakes in a piece of writing or in something they've recorded for me, but we're only working on modals. I'm only going to touch the modals. It can be so overwhelming for students to get feedback on all of it at once. I've also found myself trying to make, especially online, my instructions shorter and clearer and not going on and on. I've also think it's really important to bring models in from previous students that I can show to my current students, whether it's something they wrote, whether it's like a blog post that I had them write, whether it's a short form video that I had them record. I also think it's important as far as instructional design to be really selective about the tools that you're requiring your students to use. You don't want to overload in the number of tools that they have to use for a single session of work. Also, feedback in an online environment has to be super timely. If you're an online teacher, you probably know this, but if assignments are made to be more like these kind of short bursts, these micro bursts, then feedback can be more timely. You're grading just one thing of the assignment rather than everything. And it can really accelerate and make it more efficient for you as a grader. And it avoids what I would call like kind of grading overload. So I want to talk about these short form videos. So they are one of the most effective formats for microlearning, these short form videos. So studies have actually shown that one study showed, I should say, Gen Alpha experienced anxiety when watching any videos that went past 60 seconds. And so it would suggest that these short form videos should be somewhere between 60 and 90 seconds, which is kind of what you see in TikTok. So these short-term videos are things that are, engaging, easy to produce, and they can be used in the classroom to reinforce concepts that are covered with your students. I'm a big fan of having my students now record their own short-form videos. They all have phones. So it's accessible, which I think is a key factor when you're dealing with an online environment, that the technology is accessible. It's also familiar to them. They're familiar with these platforms. They're familiar with these styles, more familiar than I am in many cases. I also think they connect learning to real world communication. They're practicing their communication skills. These are some examples of stuff that I have done in my class. So I've had them take short form videos. That was just a personal introduction. They had 30 seconds to do it, and they had to send it to me. I've done Zoom style interviews where they're interviewing each other on their habits. This happened recently when I was asking students to kind of reflect on how their health has changed since moving to the United States for better or for worse. I've had students do TikTok style reviews of a favorite product for a lower level. Sometimes we've done what's called a hot take, which is like you take an issue in the news, something that is controversial, and they have 60 seconds to give their take on it. They can do a promo for an event. They can use these for movie reviews or episode reviews for something that they're watching, perhaps even a show that you might be watching together with them as part of your lesson. So the point is to keep it short. So creativity studies show that when you do put limitations on a task like that, like you're saying, you have to do this video in 60 seconds or less, it turns into a game. And it can actually push us to be more creative. Having more parameters and more limitations in this case can gamify it and can actually help students produce something a little bit easier because you're giving them some rules to follow. I've done this sometimes in my writing where I said, okay, well, you got to write your biography, but it has to be a max of 40 words, and you have to use 3 of these words. So by setting these videos at 60 cents, it's 60 seconds. It forces them to be concise. It forces them to summarize, and it forces them to really figure out what their key points are. And I think summarizing is one of the hardest things, one of the hardest skills for my students to learn. And I'd always focused so much on doing it in writing, and now more and more I'm having them summarize in this way using these kinds of short form videos. Now, I don't want to suggest that all learning should be kind of like, superficial. So there's other research out there that I saw that this Gen Z's interest in these short-term form videos, like on TikTok, actually leads to what I call like these deeper dives. So they might go and use a short form video on TikTok to discover content, then that they'll go to YouTube for to go deeper into the topic and watch longer videos about. There's research that suggests this is a very common habit. They podcast listenings apparently have increased more than 50% since last year among Gen Z. Uh, Young people also are favoring commentaries on topics that they're already fans of by going to YouTube. So they'll like deep dive and watch these kind of longer videos. Perhaps they saw a soccer game and then they want to go to YouTube and watch one that kind of dissects the game. Or they'll go into more detail about a movie that they've seen, or so this is about germane load. This is about building on prior knowledge or content that they might have seen in a short form video, but then they are motivated to do a deeper dive in a long-term video. So watching that short TikTok might lead to a deeper dive on YouTube, for example. So when I think about a teacher, I like this concept of deep dives because I want to choose them really deliberately. So I've taught with Ventures. This is Scope and Sequence from Ventures Book 3. And there's so many choices of units I can cover, topics I can cover, grammar I can cover. And so one thing that you can do to make sure you're choosing content that students want to dive deeply in is to have them help you choose the content that you're going to cover. So if you are using a book, for example, have a vote about what units are the most interesting to your students. Each of my classes is going to have different interests, and they're going to have different preferences. And I want to be student responsive. I want to have that inform the decisions I make about the content that I'm going to cover. And then I can work in my learning objectives from there. So it might sound, what I don't want you to think is that I'm like primarily advocating for like just ways to simplify lesson planning and instructional design. And I don't want you to think that, like learning should be just like superficial. That's not where I'm going with this. But we need to focus also on, we need to focus on content delivery up front, so there are no barriers. And then we need to focus on learner engagement through these deep dives. So I took this quote from Kathy Moore. She's an internationally recognized expert in instructional design. She says, the most important principle for designing lively e-learning is to see e-learning design not as information design, but as designing an experience. I love that. So each module or lesson that I teach, I see it as a story with a beginning and a middle and an end. And I want to think of my learner as an active participant in that story, not as a passive recipient. So what does that particular student bring as a learner, as a thinker, and how can I take that deeper? So how do we dive deeper? How can I motivate my students to want to dive deeper? One way is to cover fewer topics over a period of time, but also motivating to learn more about the topics that you've chosen. So you might have already done the pre-work, like understanding what your students' interests are, but then figure out how to personalize it to their interests, to current events, to the real world. This means that each semester I teach is going to be different. If I'm wanting my students to respond to an issue in the news or topics that are relevant, well, those change super fast. I've brought in articles on driverless cars and on artificial intelligence, and those get outdated really quickly. So I sometimes think of myself as as a museum curator, and yeah, I'm trying to create a different experience for each set of students, which I know is more work, but I also know that it means I'm meeting them where they are. It means that I'm going to be reducing the intrinsic load on them, but also increasing that germane load of something that I think they have some familiarity with, and then I can help them as a language teacher with the language they need to discuss it and then take them further and take them deeper. So I'm always changing my lesson plans, and I think that's something that it's something that is really important for me to make sure that it's a curated experience for each set of students. Now, thankfully, there are other resources out there. Cambridge does great with their teacher and student resources that are available to dive deeper. There are lots of supplementary materials, videos, articles, interactive tools, worksheets that can reinforce and expand on a lesson. If you do use a textbook, I know sometimes it can be overwhelming to see all the other ancillary materials, but do not overlook those. We write those extra materials with this idea of taking a unit in a deeper scope. And that is the approach that I would take more, because I would want to really break down and go into that topic more deeply. I did this with Evolve Digital, where we were trying to really curate these experiences with these extra materials by providing supplements that added deep dives. And then finally, I'm also a huge fan of supplementing with fluency reading. So Rob Waring once said, I'm going to quote here, "We should use at least a quarter of our class time to give students opportunities to get better at language they already know." Language they already know. If you are just exposing students to new language all the time, they're not having time to process and reprocess the language they already know. It's not going to become readily available to them. So I use a lot of leveled readers and short stories, but I always go a level below where my students are. So if I have a student who is at a CFR B1 level, I have them read an A2 level text, sometimes even an A1, because I want to promote fluency reading. I don't want them to get frustrated by the vocabulary. I don't want them to be consulting a dictionary if they don't have to. Fluency reading really builds comprehension, but it also builds great confidence in learners, and they say, hey, I'm able to finish the whole book, and it's not just about vocabulary, it's also about the way we treat anything in language, right? So by bringing in, what I find is by bringing in these short stories and these fiction, I'm also exposing them to, not just high frequency verbs, but high frequency grammar as well. And the goal is to provide, as much accessible reading practice as possible that can support both vocabulary and grammar in context. And then finally, I'm a big supporter of localizing and adding a local spin to whatever material I am using. This means that you have to get to know what your student's local context is. If you live in the same city, you have an idea. If you're teaching somebody from a different place, you get to know where they are from and get to try and localize and personalize the material that you bring. If you want to perhaps go and see what a local newspaper is writing about that day from where they live, and make that into a lesson. Think about the local art. I've done stuff on our local murals down in downtown Houston, which are these great, huge, beautiful murals that are tied to the United Nations Sustainable Goals, and each one is about a different goal, like, zero poverty, zero hunger, and they're right here in Houston. And I was like, well, I'm going to use that as the content of my course, and I'm going to tie that to these United Nations Sustainable Goals. I think if I just started my lesson by talking about, hey, here's the United Nations Sustainable Goals, I think I might lose some students. But if I say, hey, look at these murals, they are, literally a 20-minute drive away from you. We can even go see them, and then we can talk about them. I think that this local spin, it really it motivates students, and it makes it real. And, it's hard if you're using, as a materials writer, when I'm writing books, I am trying to write books that can be used globally, right? But it's up to me as the teacher getting that book to then transfer that locally for my particular students. So as a teacher, I really make a conscious effort to challenge my own assumptions that I have about my students, about maybe why a particular student may be behind the other students. And what I want to fight in myself is this kind of glass half empty mentality, and viewing students through a deficit lens, that their student, as a teacher might say, oh, my students are just disengaged and they don't like to read, or they get bored easily, or they can't focus for more than a few seconds. Well, why aren't they doing the reading? Perhaps the problem isn't an aversion to reading. Perhaps I've asked them to read about something that really doesn't interest them, and that is on me. Perhaps I'm imposing my own interests or my own expectations on them. I don't teach the same way now that I did 20 years ago. I think if I still taught that same way, I would be disengaging in my classroom, because I'm not evolving with my students. This is why I read so much about Gen Z and Gen Alpha, because these are now my students, and I feel like if I'm not adapting myself to their societal experience, then there's going to be a gap, and I'm not going to be able. It's not strategic in that case. If I'm not meeting them, if I'm not understanding where they're coming from and how I can tailor my instruction and tailor my materials to meet their needs, as well as their skills and their digital skills and their technology skills. So it's all about like a shift in mindset, and embracing an asset model. So I want to see my students as assets to foster a more inclusive and empowering learning environment. I want to ask myself, what are they capable of? What motivates them? How can I meet them where they are? What perspectives and experiences and talents do they already have that they bring to class, and how can I tap into those? And by tapping into what my students care about, we make learning more meaningful and motivating. And this also includes not just the content, but the platforms we use. From the social media we use, to the video content we use, to the interactive platforms we use. I want to bridge those gaps between the inputs and also more extensive reading. And assuming an asset model allows me to make sure that I'm shifting my focus from what students lack to what they can offer, assuming that they have strengths that can enrich my lessons, that they are curious, but that it's up to me to maintain that curiosity through what I am teaching and how I'm presenting the information, and that they enjoy learning, and that they enjoy learning through particular formats like the short form videos. That's been a new evolution for me, and I think that it's been responded to in a positive way. So this is really about student-centered teaching, and so it comes under this umbrella of culturally responsive teaching, which you might have heard of, but I just wanted to put this out there in case you hadn't. So culturally responsive teaching is assets-based. It's this belief that students do bring valuable knowledge and skills and experiences to the classroom. It focuses on their strengths as opposed to their deficits. It also supports and challenges students by providing meaningful support, but while also pushing students to grow and succeed. It places students at the center of learning. So instruction is student-driven, not teacher-driven, which means their voices and the choices they make and the perspectives that they have help to shape their learning experience and help to shape the materials I'm using and how I'm going to present them. It also leverages students' linguistic and cultural backgrounds. So, it recognizes and integrates students' home languages, cultural practices, and identities into instruction to make learning more relevant and more affirming. And then it also, another thing under the umbrella of CRT is that learning doesn't happen in isolation. It's something that builds bridges between the classroom and students' broader lives, and fosters more strong connections within these support systems between students, schools, families, and communities. This is big idea, right? We're not talking granular. We're talking more of a big idea, kind of theoretical. But this is also in the back of my mind at the same time that the cognitive load theory is in the back of my mind. And all of that is informing what I want to do in my online class, how I can make the material accessible, but also how I can make it engaging, and how it can provide an experience that my students want to be on with me. So the last point I want to make also is about grading. I had mentioned a little bit about feedback earlier. So this mindset also impacts the grade, how I grade my students' work. I want to respond to their ideas. Most important, are they able to communicate an idea? And I focus on that before I will touch their grammar. It's not that I don't touch their grammar, but if they are able to communicate something and I'm able to understand it, that is key, and above all else. So grading and feedback are terms that are often used interchangeably, but they actually do serve two different functions, and they have two different purposes. So grades are summative. They signal how well a student has met expectations, but they really explain why or offer guidance on how to improve. Feedback, on the other hand, is formative. So it is intended to support growth through offering kind of specific, timely, constructive information about their work. I went too fast, sorry. So rather than being like a static score, feedback acts as this like bridge between current performance and future improvement. It engages and encourages students to be reflective. It can help them identify their strengths and areas for development, and it guides their next steps. And so, unlike grading, which is more like a one-way transmission of information from teacher to student, feedback really invites dialogue. It fosters a more collaborative approach. So if I'm just doing completion grades, I'm saying, yeah, you did this. These are the ideas that I like. These are the ideas you could expand on. You get 100% for doing it. I'm not grading them. I'm giving them something to think about for the next part of the task. I also think it encourages students to feel more encouraged to revise and ask questions and engage more deeply with the content when I focus more on feedback than I do on grading. And it's emphasizing process over product. It cultivates more resilience, it cultivates more self-regulation. So, where grades are measuring learning, feedback is really there to develop learning. And I think when you focus more on the quality and timing of your feedback, making sure it's timely as well, you can support this more student-centered approach to the learning environment. Okay, I think I went a little over time there. I'm sorry about that. But that gets me to the end. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to, Sergio, let you come back.
Yes. Well, first of all, thanks a lot, Colin. Very interesting. Thanks a lot for sharing a bit of your knowledge, your practice, your tips and suggestions, all the things that you brought to the presentation. Thanks a lot. Let's
Sure.
let's check the Q&A box to see whether we have some questions. We have a question from Hema Halabi. I I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but the person says nowadays dogme has been talk of the town, as they say, especially for online teaching. What are your thoughts about it?
It's not something we've been talking about in my context.
Yeah. Okay. Um, let's see the next one. From Tuani. As a private teacher, how long is enough for a private lesson with microlearning?
um, Kind of like 10 minutes or less. Even 5 minutes. Sometimes it's 2 minutes. It depends on, again, it's so easy when you start to go into grammar that you can just keep going and going and going. So part of it is me just reminding myself this is micro. I don't need to get into all to the details. We're just going to focus on like the third person S because that's the issue, right? Or we're going to focus on verbs that are followed by infinitives and just focus on that, right? So very quick, quick examples.
Mhm.
Ideally, examples that you can take from their paper and show right on the screen. This is what you said. This is what you need to say. This is why, and then move on. It's like you don't want to beat a dead horse. And if you just keep saying it over and over, it doesn't mean they're going to be retaining it. So I would say 2 minutes, sometimes 5 minutes, no more than 10 minutes. That's been my approach.
Awesome. There's another question from Tuani as well, talking about books. You kind of tackled this already, but she asks, do you recommend any book or course on this micro learning content?
So I have been reading it through psychology studies, not a particular book. So all of my research has been from, Journal of Psychology, and I've also found stuff in applied linguistics, but it hasn't actually come from like a particular, likely one large source.
Wonderful. That's great. There's one final question from her. I don't know if we'll have time for that, but she asks, can you explain how would you organize a class covering the present simple? For example, each class would cover vocabulary, the next one just grammar, just like that?
So I start with content. I always start with content. So I will bring in a short listening or a short reading, and that will drive my lesson from the very beginning. And then from there, that's where I will get to the simple present. Perhaps the simple present appears in that content somewhere. You want it illustrated in the content. Perhaps you're using the simple content just to respond to the reading. Like you might have an article and you do true false statements, right? True false statements are full of simple present. This happens, this didn't happen, or this does happen. It's perfect for responding to content in that kind of form. So start with your content. Start with what is interesting. Find an article, make an article, use AI to create a quick article if you want, or a listening, and help that build the rest of your lesson. You can always find opportunities to pull in a tense of some sort. I can take any content and shift it in some way to make it relevant in terms of grammar. What I would not do is say, "Hey guys, we're starting with the simple present today. Here's a chart. I do, you do, she does." That for me just has not worked. They get it at the time, but they don't produce it.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it was pretty clear. Thank you. Thank you very much. We don't have more questions.
Okay.
We are running out of time, so we have the raffle now. So, Colin, thank you very, very much for your time, and we hope to have you in the near future for other webinars very soon.
Okay. Thank you all for joining me on this Friday, and enjoy your weekends.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Okay, guys, now it's raffle time. My colleague Leonardo is helping me. He's going to project a QR code now, so you can scan this QR code. And when you scan this QR code, you go to a page where you put your name. So please complete it with your full name, okay? So we can easily find you among the participants in the list of participants. So you can scan the QR code, or you can go to joinmyquiz.com, the page joinmyquiz.com, and you can use that code 537751, and you can log in as well. Okay. So people are connecting. We have like 14, 15, 16 people. We'll give you 1 minute, maximum two, so everybody has time to connect and run for the prizes. Let me talk about the prizes again. We are going to raffle three prizes. Okay, the first one is going to be a Cambridge kit with some Cambridge goodies with the Cambridge brand on it, and some teacher development books. Then the second prize is going to be a 2-hour self-study online course. It's called Developing Speaking Skills. This course is worth $24. So you're getting the chance to have it for free. It's a 2-hour self-study online teacher development course. And the last one, the third prize, is going to be an online teaching development online course as well, called Teaching English Online. This is a 5-hour online course. These courses are from Cambridge, so you get a certificate, a Cambridge certificate, when you finish them. Okay, so a bit more time, maybe. We have 32 participants, 33. Let's just wait a few seconds to start um, spinning the wheel. Let me just check here. Okay, I think we can start. Okay, Leo, I think we can spin the wheel, and let's see who is the first winner. Fingers crossed here. Okay, the first winner for the Cambridge kit is Morgana Marina Villa. Congratulations, Morgana. I'm just uh, screenshotting your name here, so we'll get in contact. We'll get in touch with you via email, and we'll arrange this prize to be sent to you. Okay. Okay. So next one, Leonardo, please. Let's spin again. Second prize is going to be a developing speaking skills online teacher course by Cambridge. Okay, let me see. The second winner is Marcelo B. Teodoro. Okay, Marcelo, congratulations. We'll get in contact with you very soon, and we will send you the code and all the instructions you need to take your course. Congratulations. Now, the last prize. This is going to be Teaching English Online, a 5-hour online course from Cambridge. And Homi Sakaguchi. Let me just screenshot here. Okay, congratulations. Congratulations to all of you. Thanks a lot again for being with us this afternoon. I hope you liked it. And we see each other very soon. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend and see you next time. Thank you, guys. Bye bye.